Welcome into the Train with the Best podcast. The podcast is bringing high performance to the people. I'm Craig Hoffman, a media and sports performance professional.
And I'm Chris Gorez, master trainer and international presenter.
And I used to know what I said in the intro. Now I just know that I'm supposed to say we bring high performance to the people, and I can't remember my own name.
So you do several podcasts, and the iteration of our intro has changed throughout the years. We've been doing this for how many years, Craig? Because I got asked this the other day, and I was like, shoot, has it really been like 8 years that we've been doing this?
Yeah, March I think was 7 or 8. Here, if you give me a second, I could scroll back through. Our Train with the Best anniversary was it's like mid-March. So if I go through the calendar, I think it's the 17th maybe. But then again, I don't know that I actually have a Train with the Best anniversary is March 13th, but I don't know.
It's got to be 2017.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. So
2017. Here's why I know. Because I can still remember as clear as day where I was when I first contacted you. It was the Happy Privilege Day, and we were at the Pro Bowl down in Orlando for the 2016 Pro Bowl. So
there you go.
That's how. Yeah.
Well, also privilege. We can do it based off Bree. How old's Bree?
Bree too. Yeah. That's right.
Bree's 7.
We're 7. Yeah, you're right. Let's do it off of Bree. Happy Privilege Day is not a good day.
Yeah. Well, there is that. I also remember where I was when you first contacted me. I was in the Harris Teeter parking lot in Reston, about to go get some hot baked date chicken.
That's right. And from that initial meeting at Pete's Coffee. Yeah, here we are.
Here we are, 7.5 years later. So today on the show, we're going to talk to Sam Miller, who is the CEO and founder of Proteus. You'll learn about Proteus in the introduction with Sam, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But then Chris and I are going to come back and chat about our chat with Sam on the back end. So here's our talk with Sam Miller from Proteus. Our guest today is the founder of Proteus. You probably saw this in the Netflix series Quarterback. You saw Patrick Mahomes look like he wanted to break Sam Miller's machine with the rotational power that he had. But it's very, very cool, piece of equipment, 3-dimensional motion, lots of metrics. And not only are we going to talk about what Sam founded and why he did it and why he thinks it's so valuable, but they have done a ton of research when it comes to force development, power, and not only on the high performance side, but as Chris, we always talk about high performance, injury prevention, two sides of the same coin. So with that, we welcome in Sam Miller. Sam, thanks for joining the pod.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here, guys.
Has Mahomes or anyone else actually broken the machine?
We've got a lot of really competitive athletes using it, and historically there have been some breaks and issues, but it's always resolved really fast. So Mahomes, no issues with Mahomes though, thankfully.
None with Pat, and shout out to the service team. So as I mentioned, we see in quarterback, Pat and his trainer are using it for a lot of rotational power type of stuff. You describe and kind of the literature that you guys put out, describe this as a 3D motion machine. Can you give us the short version of the backstory of why you wanted to create something like this and what kind of the impetus and how it came together?
Yeah, certainly. So I'll start by saying what Proteus is it's often a very misunderstood tool and technology, partially because it's just radically new and different. It's its own animal. There's not really a comparable. But what it is it is both a performance testing tool and a resistance training tool. Right. On the performance testing side, which is really where there's incredible value across the board. But on the performance testing side, it is you can think of it kind of like a sports science lab in a box, right? We've been able to package up, comprehensive measurements for strength and power, specifically around multiplanar rotational movements, and do that with very little effort, almost no expertise required, and then serve up reports that inform programming. How this came about, it really, what we're doing is we basically endeavor to create the new universal standard for total body strength and power measurement. And what we're doing is a dramatic kind of improvement to the way that physical strength and power is measured. Historically, those measurements have been very one-dimensional. And it's not because those movements are the multi-dimensional movements aren't important. We know that's not the case, and we actually have findings that have proven that is certainly not the case. But it's very difficult to do and do accurately. And so we've got all these advancements in sleep technology with wearables and camera systems for biomechanics and so forth. But physical strength and power is just, in our view, is just very limited to these one-dimensional movements. So what we realized was the solution to solve this void in data that we see is it actually requires creating a new machine altogether. You cannot measure strength and power for a multiplanar movement using a cable machine. It's physically impossible. You can't. It's a rope, right? So it's resistance and force is coming from one direction only. So if you're moving through multiple planes, it's not adjusting accordingly to match your movement. So measurements get totally thrown off dramatically if you just change your foot position slightly, because you're going to hit that sweet spot of that motion at a certain point. So what we did is we created a new machine that provides constant resistance in all planes and directions. You could think about it kind of like moving through a fluid, right? Or training underwater, or through a force field. You can change the viscosity. So no matter what speed or direction you move, it's just constant force.
Right.
The inspiration for it came from my own athletic experiences. I remember walking out of a training session when I was a young athlete in Boston. I was like 14 years old, in and out of physical therapy and training for a knee injury. Walked out of a session with a teammate who had an oblique strain. And we had a sheet of paper that had the same training program on it. And it was just like, to me, it was like, we've got a really talented coaches, trainers, physicians, or, clinicians. It's not about them. It's that we don't have the right tools that make it really easy to be able to inform personalization to training. So took a concept that my dad actually invented at MIT in the early 90s, this mechanical machine developed in the basement of my house. I kind of rebuilt that, reverse engineered it, and then we built software around it, and we've got a ton of IP as well. So it's been we're 7 years into this now. We've got about 500 client sites, from pro and college sports to commercial gyms, sports performance, physical therapy. We've got about 75,000 users that range from some of the best athletes in the world, Mahomes, John Rahm, Damian Lillard, Justin Verlander, all the way to users that range from age 8 to age 98. So it's a pretty incredibly versatile tool.
That's an awesome story. I feel like we are getting closer and closer to the Dragon Ball Z Goku gravity chamber, and your piece of equipment is certainly close to that. When you talk about constant resistance in all planes of motion, right? So I think that's really cool, because for people who want the translation of results in the weight room to lead to results on the field, that's really what we're in. We're not trying to train you to be a better squatter. We're trying to train you to be a better athlete on the field, and movement on the field isn't sagittal in nature. It's transverse, it's frontal plane, it's movements at different speeds, it's all kinds of different things that are not emulated underneath a squat bar, right? So I love hearing the story of the machine. I love hearing the problem, because the question of, hey, how do we make athletes better? How do we take a look at a program and say that what I need is exactly the same thing as somebody else's needs? Like that's kind of insane to me. And for us to be able to personalize things and customize things to make people better at exactly what it is that they need to get better at, that's awesome to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's good to hear. And I think it goes beyond sports too, right? We've got
So that was one of the questions that I wanted to ask, because we're living in an age where we're getting more and more data on athletes, and just athletes in general, not just world-class athletes, but everyday athletes. What are some of the data points that you look at that is going to be relevant to somebody who's listening to this show?
Yeah, good question. So, I'll start with this. It's now the case that physical strength and power are biomarkers, right? They're tied to the length of your life, and quality of your life.
Wow.
And I think it's a really exciting and interesting moment in time where, strength training, for example, has surged in popularity. And so it's no longer confined to bodybuilding and elite athletics. Sure. It's just like you need to, and actually a proof point of that is sales for cardio equipment has declined like 62% over the last 3 years. So, so it's essential, physical strength. Now and so we asked the question then, well then physical strength for what? Is there specific movements? Is it all movements? Is it total body? And what we see a lot are some of these basic foundational movements. Take the squat, for example. Critically important movement, right? Classically overtrained, specifically in the sagittal plane. And the question is like, well, why? And what are the other movements that matter? So one of the things that we've done that I think is really interesting is like we've, over the years, developed, we've now surpassed 1 billion data points.
Wow.
We had last year alone, there were just under, it was 99.6 million reps performed on Proteus machines. And in doing so, we've built the world's largest and only database for multi-planar strength and power. So recently we've started to ask, and one thing I'll note is that like when you do a Proteus test, usually like we've got standardized tests in our software. You go through it, like 15 movements will be one standardized test. It's infinite. You could test any combination of movements, but standardized test for like 15 movements, you do it in 4 to 5 minutes. And then it's going to give you a report. It's going to tell you what's your biological power age. It's going to tell you basically what areas of the body, what movement categories are above average, below average. You compare yourself by age, sex, height, weight, sport position, skill level to whomever you want to contextualize it. What areas of the body you need to work on? What areas strong, weak, above average, below average? What's improving? What's declining? What do you need to work on and why? And what this does is it provides like this, it creates this incredible buy-in for any type of user who's working with a coach who is able to very easily communicate without really having to explain anything. Where do you stand? How are you doing? How are you progressing? For the coach, they're showing their value. And oftentimes a lot of our site partners actually monetize this. There's a huge ROI component of Proteus. Like it's a major revenue driver. Not just selling these assessment reports and so forth, but there's also, you can generate multi-week programs that export out of this. There's really next level stuff. It's almost like a fitness vending machine.
Can I double click on that for a second, Sam? Because I always get nervous when I hear, because it almost sounds too good to be true, right? And we've heard this from many equipment vendors over the years of various kinds of like, hey, use my thing and it'll tell you everything you need to know and follow my program. We'll solve all your problems. So I'm curious who you've collaborated with and how you go about the programming side of it based off the test, designing the right test, getting the data, interpreting the data through whatever formulas you're using. Because obviously you're not spitting out pure raw data to the coach. I mean, you are spitting out some, but it's coming with the recommendations of programming.
Yep.
So who have you worked with and why are you confident in the program that it ultimately spits out?
Very important question to ask. And I'm glad you asked it because there is so much noise in this space, right?
Sure.
And we historically, we've been doing this for 7, almost 8 years, have been ultra conservative about the risk of being perceived as a gimmick, because there's just so much flash in the pan stuff. That's not what Proteus is. Proteus is, this is like the real deal. There's many layers to it. And that said, we are super transparent with like, when we're giving you a percentile, it's new normative data. So we're showing you what the sample size is, right? You decide. Our position is always, is it an empowerment tool for a coach, right?
Sure, right, sure.
So we want to be clear on that position. How we got here, and I'll say like the programming algorithms are all evolving, but we used to output just raw data, and we learned the hard way that like just nobody cares. Nobody cares about data, right? Unless you know what it means and how.
We do, but we're nerds.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, right. But like you guys are what, top 0.1%. So like like people care about data.
Craig, we are top 0.1%.
I'm going to say, cut that up.
Oh,
This podcast is over. We did it. This is the last episode. We graduated. Yay!
You're welcome. No, I'm just kidding. It's and it's like, but the reality is like you're in a busy environment. You're working with somebody,
Right.
It's not a moment to be learning or trying to figure something out. You're trying to, you're being a professional. You're trying to provide a service. And so we kind of overestimated, this is kind of a couple of years ago, we overestimated people's appetite for figuring something out, right? We've worked with, and so I'll use an example in the baseball space, because that's one of the areas that we really started in, one of the niche markets that we started in initially. And we partnered with Eric Cressy right out of the gate. He was a very early adopter of Proteus. I think he got one of maybe our third or fourth machine ever, like one that at that time I was like building these myself with two people in a, this is like 2018, 2019. And we basically, did a whole bunch of testing. We did some research with them. And then we took that and we realized, oh, wait a minute, let's turn this into what we call Power Report. And then we released that. And then we went further and said, well, let's take this a step further. And we realized, wait a minute, what matters is actually the difference between power and acceleration. What we're really doing is force velocity profiling here.
There we go.
And we then created the Cressy performance test in our software. And that test has been done like 20, 30,000 times. Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable. And we found from that test alone, there are at least 3 specific Proteus metrics that are directly correlative with exit velocity and throwing velocity. We actually, I think next week, we're publicly putting out this state of power baseball focused series of studies that looks at, every 50 watts you improve in power on the shot put on Proteus is plus 1 mile an hour in exit velocity.
Wow.
Right. So there's all these like really deep connections. We've built this trainer advisory board that includes Bobby Stroop, Mahomes' trainer, Cressy, well-known, Phil DeRue on the MMA fighting side, Spencer Tatum's John Rahm's trainer. John Rahm's a longtime user. And then recently we added Dr. Andy Galpin to our advisory board, who's been really helpful as we've started to explore the relationship with power. There's this new term, powerpenia. It's like sarcopenia. How does power change as you age? And that helped inform some of the latest findings we put out on this state of power report on how does strength and power change over a lifespan, with some really interesting findings. So we've got, we've done this collaboratively with a lot of really excellent partners, including some of the best, most credible and authentic, well-respected kind of trainers and scientific groups, including our first partner was the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, so the number 1 orthopedic hospital in the country.
Got it. So what are your basic rules of thumb that you've found here, right? So like there's so much data out there, and I'll use some of the others that are out there, right? Like you got the force plates from Vald, you've got the Kaiser equipment, which we've been using for a long time. You've got GPS data, which gives us real-time data on how fast somebody can sprint, how many times they're in zone 5 or whatever, right? What are like the things that pop out that, hey, like every athlete should care about this?
Mm-hmm. Rotation. I mean, walking is a rotational movement. So it's not just for athletes. So the back to kind of what I was saying earlier is like those tools that you mentioned, all of those tools that you just mentioned, and those companies, great products, great companies. Like we think that is all really good, valuable information, good stuff. I don't know about information from a Kaiser, but like as a training tool, Kaiser is excellent, right?
Yeah.
And we really like what Valve is doing. You could think about it in some ways, Proteus is like a rotational force plate. Actually, that's something that absolutely Eric Cressy says. And I think one of the reason that I can say that rotation matters is beyond the obvious is like, we just put out this study on how does strength and power change as you age. Right. And rotational movements decline 18% faster than sagittal plane movements as you get older.
Interesting.
Right. And so, and further, if there was, no matter what demographic, no matter what age group, sport type, et cetera, that you look at, the most deficient movements across the board are always rotational.
Yeah. I would 1,000% agree with that for sure.
Yep. So the question is, though, how do you identify that? How do you know when to do that? How do you know when? Basically, we know from the science, of course, the well-established science around the importance of training along the force velocity curve and trying to shift that curve up. So the question is, like, if somebody's going to be committing time to improving themselves, are they spending that time in the right way, right? And and it needs to be across using a whole variety of tools. And what we look at is our system is like the data hub that helps inform decisions around all these other tools to use. Got it. Right. So we see, like, lower, lower extremity vertical pushing is most efficient across the board in acceleration, not strength. So like, the implications of that are more plyometric type training, right?
Yes.
So there's all these incredible insights, and to help make those decisions and know when someone needs to be doing what and why, this is like a cheat sheet for coaches.
Gotcha. So diving into the rotation stuff, because I know, like, symmetry is a word that gets thrown out there a lot, right? Especially when you're having a patient that's coming back off of surgery or injury, right? They want that injured leg or leg that was just operated on to be symmetrical to the leg that was not operated on. And you see so many of these PTs do things like triple hop tests and this and that so that they can compare one leg to the other and see if they're symmetrical. In the rotational world, what have you found in terms of rotation and symmetry, and what matters?
It's a really, really good question. It's one of the challenges with, like, when you have new data, right, is you're trying to establish what it means. You need, like, without a norm, there's not a reference. So it's taken us years to establish this, but what we know now is really, I think it's confirmatory in a lot of ways, which is that, like, well, let's go back to baseball players, right?
Yeah.
It's normal for baseball players to have a pretty significant bilateral difference.
They have
for exactly.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we just introduced into our test results is when you look at individual exercises, depending on the filters that you set for who you're comparing yourself to, if you say, I'm, a male baseball player, that's a high school player, we're going to show you, okay, you might have a 10%, right to left side difference in power output for a trunk rotation. That's actually normal.
Got it.
Right. So the norm reference points allow you to know when is there a red flag. And what we find is, like, the specific sports, especially at the higher levels, have the biggest bilateral imbalances. Yeah. And those aren't necessarily bad things.
Yeah. I love that you say that, because so many people look at, like, Usain Bolt and they say, like, if you look at Usain Bolt, his stride is not symmetrical. He's getting more power off of one side than the other. Michael Phelps, he gets more power off of one side than the other. Are we going to change that and fix that? Heck no. As a trainer, that's what makes them special. Why would we fix that? Why would we change that, right? So I love that you say that, like, there is a normal amount of asymmetry that should be embraced and not deemed as bad.
You totally agree. And I think this kind of jives directly with, like, the main point, which is that each individual has their own way of kind of moving. And in some cases, those need correction, right?
Yeah.
But you need to understand where an individual is at.
Yes.
What's their normal? And then how does that look against, like, the normal for that demographic? And this allows you to see that. And we let the coach, this is about, like I said, empowering the coach. We want the coach to make that kind of determination, that decision, but we make the information really easy to take action on, depending on what you're looking to do. And that has been proven to be extraordinarily helpful, not just in producing results, but making it really easy for a coach to not just get buy-in, helps with retention. It's highly, highly marketable. And then for the business that, is hosting the Proteus or owns the Proteus, There are numerous ways to kind of monetize that directly, that have been extraordinarily powerful.
I realize we've made a grave mistake in not booking you for an hour here, as we are running out of time. But I want to ask one last thing real quick, if I can, Sam, which is I've gotten more into the endurance space recently, both as an athlete and with some of the stuff I'm doing as a coach in the hybrid space and longer running races. What kind of research have you guys done, and what have you found in terms of power output for endurance athletes?
Oh, such a good question. I mean, you guys are asking good questions. My short answer is just not enough. So we definitely don't claim to be experts in everything, that's for sure. But I also say, like, this is a new frontier. And one of the things that we've done a really good job of is attracting, like, the partners that we have, our customers, our clients, our trainers, the ambassadors are all pioneers. And so a lot of them are working on this stuff independently and answering some of these questions, and we like to assist. But that remains to be seen. It's a really important question. I think we've been thinking about it for a while. We actually have a endurance test in the software. We haven't changed the results to tell you, something that's actionable yet, because we haven't yet. It's going to take some time to be able to firmly establish in a really defensible way that, what we're communicating to you about the results is actually proven to be true. And we don't know that yet.
Yeah, it's been fun for us to talk about, as Chris and I come from more the sport athlete, baseball, basketball, football backgrounds, and I'm transitioning to the space. I'm like, guys, I know this stuff works. You got to trust me, but like having data behind it is obviously always better. And we'll see as we gather more data from Proteus, and I'm sure other places doing research on similar things.
For sure.
How that goes. Sam, this was fantastic. If folks want to know more, they want to either read some of the information or they're interested in contacting Proteus about getting a machine, as we have a ton of coaches who listen to this, where should they go?
Go to proteusmotion.com, Proteus motion.com. Hit the blue button on the website, says request a demo. It's not just for demos. Just fill out information. We'll be in touch. We highly recommend talking to someone from our team just for 15 minutes, because I can guarantee that it'll not just be worthwhile, but you will learn things that you can't otherwise learn that are really important for you. So that's the best method. We're also on social platforms at Proteus Motion. Instagram is a great place. We've got some excellent content there. But if anyone's interested, definitely go through the site, submit your information, and set up a time to talk.
Sam, this was great. Let's do it again down the road.
I'd love to.
Thanks again to Sam Miller for joining us, the CEO and founder of Proteus. And Chris, really interesting conversation. I really did. I blocked 30 minutes off for our chat with Sam. We were talking a little bit before we started to record, and then I realized we made a terrible mistake that I didn't just ask him for an hour of his time, because there's so much more that we could have dove into. But I think the thing that sticks out to both of us is the idea that this is a tool that gives us data in the same way that we have a lot of other tools that we gather data with. And it's ultimately on us to interpret it. That's certainly what I take out of it. And they've done a good job of working with some experts to interpret it and take some of that load off the coaches. That way you don't have to both learn the test and then what to do with it. There is some suggestions, but ultimately, like, that idea of empowering coaches, I think, is the right approach. And it's why I come away very impressed from that conversation.
Yeah, the empowerment part is really the key there. And I think that, one, you listen to Sam and you can tell how passionate he is about the things that he's doing and why he loves his machine and what answers he can try to provide. But, he's working with the right people to find the answers that they're looking for, right? What are the questions that we need to identify and answer to help programming, right? If you're somebody who is injured, why does your program look exactly the same as somebody else's, right? So that's something that we talk about a lot on this episode or on this podcast, is we talk about an intelligent approach to training and to program design. And, the Proteus data is something that can be extremely helpful when you're talking about training athletes and how to get them better and how to get them back to high performance.
Yeah, no, for sure. You can't solve problems you don't know exist. And I think that the more creative tools that you have, and especially when it comes to like rotation specifically, There's only so many things. I mean, he does identify a kind of a hole in a lot of our stuff. Like, I mean, you and I love Kaiser. We've been using it for a long time. You have a lot of Kaiser equipment in Onyx. And you can do some rotation, like baseline pure rotational testing on the Kaiser FT, but it's not 3-dimensional. It is purely one rotation, around versus I rotate and also have the test of like how much vertical oscillation do I have, and the idea that like you're moving through water, or kind of that unlimited range of motion, the true 3-dimensional nature of the Proteus machine. That's where you can unlock some really important data and do some really important testing, because you can set up pretty much with like a Kaiser, with some other things, an accelerometer on a lot of stuff, one plane of motion to be tested, but testing multiple at once is nearly impossible. And the Proteus can do that. And that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. I love the comparison that he made of, the being able to train in water and then being able to change the viscosity of that fluid, right? So that's something that's pretty unique. It's something that is not out there. And yeah, you're right. Like, we can use Kaiser. I love Kaiser. I'll still use Kaiser. There's nothing wrong with it. But from an assessment analytical standpoint, there's a lot that the Kaiser leaves to be desired when you're trying to actually test something and compare it to right to left, or compare it to even previous data, because the angle of that rope changes everything. The distance that you cover changes everything. So yeah, like having something like the Proteus that can give you more accurate and precise data, again, that's up to you to be able to use and decipher and analyze and come up with whatever answers that you come up with. But, to be able to provide that type of data, that's extremely useful.
I think the other thing that's interesting that comes out of that conversation is the emphasis on rotation. And it makes me instantly think about my programming, as so many of our conversations on this podcast do. But because we prioritize, and with good reason, like, it's not like we should rethink everything because we listen to one podcast, whatever. And so I say that it both as a check on myself, but also to anyone listening who's like, abandon the deadlift. We must do rotational work. Right? Like, there's a reason that we do the big lifts. And yes, they are sagittal. No one says that they're perfect and they accomplish everything. But like, if you want neuromuscular drive, you want to work on the most things, you want to work on full body connectivity, like a deadlift is still unbeaten on those things. A squat, there's so much value in it. And it's not what Sam is saying is that you should abandon those things. Right. But because we prioritize those sagittal and even more than rotational frontal plane movements more, when we start to cut stuff, some of the rotation is some of the things to go. And so I think that just making sure that when you really create a holistic program, that you are getting that rotational work in there, that you're finding a way, because in a lot of gyms, it's not like, if you work in a big box gym with every cable machine and every whatever, it's really easy. But if you are just working with dumbbells or kettlebells and you don't have, cables or bands or anything, and a lot of the stuff that we do our rotational work with, do you have the tools in your tool bag to program a kettlebell chop or whatever, kind of rotational? Do you have access to med balls that you can do some of the power development in the rotational planes there? So there's a lot of ways you can obviously do these things, but making sure that they're an essential, like a routine and regular part of the program, so you don't have the atrophy of those attributes, which are even more important than we maybe even realize. I think is essential, and something that I certainly walk away from the conversation with Sam thinking about.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like you said, like you don't want to get into that recency bias where one podcast changes everything about your program or your philosophy. It just adds to the things that you're doing. And, is there a gap that you wish that you could fill with something else? And how does this help you fill that gap, right? Of course, we're not going to get rid of deadlifts. We're not going to get rid of eccentric training, right? Like, how much resistance does the sled offer if the sled's not moving? 0. How much resistance does the Proteus offer if the Proteus is not moving? 0, right? It's a constant resistance type of movement. So there's still value to isometric training, to eccentric training, to all those things, and to deadlifts. And to be able to take those and then combine that, like, that's what we always try to talk about. Like, we're not talking about deadlifts or Proteus. We're talking about deadlifts and Proteus. We're talking about using mass and velocity. We're talking about using speed training and strength training, not one versus the other. And that's what we mean when we're talking about train with the best.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was another interesting thing that Sam mentioned is like the Proteus can be the hub, is like the testing and all that kind of stuff. And certainly as a training tool, but I don't think that I didn't get the impression that the Proteus programming spits out 100% Proteus programming, which is an important thing to point out. Because if it does that, then that's how you know, no. You can't tell me that that's the only thing. Right. You should just have a gym full of Proteuses. No. There's a lot more to it than that, and Sam would certainly agree. And if you watch like the way in quarterback, to bring it all the way back around, that Mahomes trains, like you see that in a major way with all the different movement, the weight discrepancies and varieties that Bob Stroop uses with Pat, et cetera, et cetera. All right, that's our show for today. This is probably going to be our last show before I leave for the Olympics, so we'll be on a couple-week hiatus while I'm in Paris, and then when we get back, we will get back to our regularly scheduled programming. But in the meantime, Chris has done a couple of other podcasts. Some of the links are up on our page at Train with the Best 21, and of course on his page on Instagram at Trainer Gores. And if you want pictures of croissants, follow me at Craig_Hoffman.
Bon voyage, monsieur.
Merci. And we have reached the end of my French. That's it. I wish I knew how to say subscribe in French. I don't. So subscribe in English, and we'll see you next time on the Train with the Best podcast.